The monk's scream barely made it past his teeth before the axe cut it short. Not a battle cry, not a war just wet. Efficient silence as Brother Edfrith crumpled onto the manuscript he'd spent 3 years illuminating. His blood soaked through the golden leaf letters spelling out, "Blessed are the merciful," while Vikings literally urinated on the altar behind him, laughing so hard one of them fell over. This wasn't war. This was sport. June 8, 793, the day God took a sick day and forgot to lock the door behind him. Lindisfarne Abbey, the holiest site in England, turned into a Viking theme park where the rides were monks and the souvenirs were made of human bone. And here's the thing that'll keep you up tonight. The killing wasn't even the worst part. What they did after, the calculated humiliation, the performance art of cruelty, that's what shattered the medieval world's spine. Because apparently, when you've spent 158 years trusting divine protection, you forget that faith is not a shield and prayer doesn't stop axes. The Vikings were about to teach Christian England a lesson so brutal, so obscenely creative, that monasteries would become fortresses and monks would sleep with swords for the next 3 centuries. So if you think you know what happened at Lindisfarne, if you think it was just another raid, just some Vikings being Vikings, then you haven't heard the parts the history books are too squeamish to print. The parts about what they did to Brother Cuthbert before he begged them to kill him. The parts about the theatrical displays, the living trophies, the way they turned holy men into punchlines. Stick around, because this story doesn't just get darker, it gets creative. Let's set the scene properly. Lindisfarne wasn't just some random monastery. This was the beating heart of English Christianity, the place where illuminated manuscripts glowed like captured starlight, where kings came to confess their sins, where the very stones seemed soaked in holiness. Founded in 635, it had survived plagues, famines, political upheavals, everything except what was coming that June morning. 70 monks lived there, ranging from ancient scholars who'd spent 50 years copying scripture to terrified boys barely 14, sent by noble families to learn Latin and avoid the family business of dying in pointless feuds. They woke at midnight for matins, prayed through dawn, copied manuscripts until their fingers cramped, ate in silence, slept on stone, and believed truly, deeply believed, that their suffering made them untouchable, that holiness was armor, that God was watching. Brother Cuthbert, 40 years old, had never seen violence. None of them had. The youngest couldn't even imagine it. Their entire world was prayer bells and candlelight, the scratch of quills on vellum, the smell of incense and old parchment. They knew hunger, they knew cold, they knew the unique agony of kneeling on stone for hours until your knees felt like crushed glass. But violence? That was something that happened elsewhere, to other people, to those who hadn't chosen the path of peace. They were wrong in ways that would redefine wrong. When Brother Cuthbert walked to the window that morning, because the birds had gone silent, and yes, according to the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, the birds really did go silent along with fiery dragons seen flying in the air, which was probably the aurora borealis, but let's not ruin the mood. He saw them. 9 long ships, maybe 10, moving through the mist like something that had crawled out of the ocean's nightmares. Red and black striped sails, prows carved into snarling beasts that seemed to move in the fog. And men, dozens of them, jumping into the shallow water with axes that caught the dawn light like promises of what was coming. Here's what the monks didn't understand, couldn't understand. To the Vikings, Lindisfarne wasn't sacred. It was a shopping trip, a treasure chest with a cross on top, filled with silver that didn't fight back, guarded by men who'd taken vows of non-violence like idiots. The Vikings had heard stories in Norse trading courts, whispered by merchants who'd seen the English coast, about places where wealth sat unguarded, where men knelt instead of standing, where weakness was mistaken for virtue. And they'd spent a long winter killing each other over frozen dirt in Scandinavia, so a nice summer vacation of easy pickings sounded lovely. Brother Cuthbert should have run. Should have warned the others, should have done something. But his legs wouldn't move because somewhere deep in his mind, a thought was forming. A terrible, heretical thought that would haunt him until his death in a Norwegian field 3 years later. God isn't going to stop this. The monks heard them before they saw them. Not Latin, not English, but something that sounded like gravel scraped across ice, like the language of whatever lives at the bottom of the sea and shouldn't. Cuthbert finally moved, running through stone corridors, sandals slapping, screaming warnings that came too late. They gathered in the chapel. 70 men, most old, some boys. Abbot Higbald, trying to maintain dignity, told them to pray, to trust, that maybe these were lost sailors seeking shelter. When the doors exploded inward and the Vikings entered, the first thing they did wasn't kill. They laughed. Because what they saw was absurd old men in robes, young men clutching books like shields, an abbot holding up a crucifix, and speaking words in a language they didn't understand, as if Latin had magical properties. One Viking, his name lost, but his actions preserved in sagas that would later brag about this exact moment, walked up to Abbot Higbald and just looked at him, studied him like an interesting insect. Then he looked at the altar, at the silver chalice, at the gold reliquary holding St. Cuthbert's bones, at the jeweled cross that had hung there for generations, and he took them. Not violently, not with rage, just took them, casual as picking fruit. When Higbald protested, when the old man actually reached out to stop him, the Viking struck him across the face with the flat of his axe. Higbald fell, blood on the altar, blood on stone, blood on the white robes of monks who rushed forward and then froze because they'd never seen blood before. Not like this, not their own. And then the entertainment began. The younger brothers tried to run, which was hilarious to the Vikings, because where exactly were they going to run to? It's an island, cut off by tide, and they pulled the boys back by their robes, like yanking dogs on leashes, threw them to the ground, held them down while others ransacked the scriptorium. One Viking found a Gospel of Matthew that had taken 3 years to complete. Every letter formed with obsessive precision, colors mixed from crushed minerals that cost more than gold, and he tore the pages out. Not because he needed to, not because parchment had value, he could and read, but to watch the monk's face as 3 years of work became confetti. Brother Cuthbert dropped to his knees, praying the Lord's Prayer with a shaking voice, and a Viking stood over him with an axe raised, and for one moment it looked like mercy was coming. But the Viking lowered the axe and laughed and walked away, because killing Cuthbert right then would have been too kind. They wanted him to watch. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, written by monks who survived other raids, described Lindisfarne like this. Terrible portents appeared, flashes of lightning, fiery dragons flying in the air, great famine, and then the harrying of the heathen miserably destroyed. God's church by rapine and slaughter. Rapine and slaughter, such clinical words for what actually happened. Alcuin of York, scholar serving Charlemagne's court, was more specific in his letter to the bishop. Never before has such terror appeared in Britain. The church of St. Cuthbert is spattered with the blood of the priests of God, despoiled of all its ornaments. A place more venerable than all in Britain is given as prey to pagan peoples, spattered with blood. The monks who didn't run were stripped, and we're not just talking about robes. Dignity, identity, humanity, all of it torn away, while Vikings forced them to watch the systematic destruction of everything they built. Manuscripts thrown into mud, pages that took months to illuminate, ruined in seconds, because to the Vikings this wasn't art, it was kindling. Chalices melted down for raw silver, because why keep the pretty cup when you can have the metal? Relics scattered, bones of saints that pilgrims had traveled hundreds of miles to venerate, kicked around like trash, because to the Norse, these weren't sacred objects, they were just dead people's leftovers. One Viking found the library, shelves of books representing generations of knowledge, the accumulated learning of centuries, and swept his arm across them, watching them fall like dominoes, because why not? Another found the communion wine cellar and drank straight from the barrel, then smashed it red wine flooding across the floor and mixing with actual blood until you couldn't tell which was which. And the symbolism was so on the nose, it would be funny if it wasn't so utterly horrifying. Some monks were drowned in the tidal pools surrounding Lindisfarne, held underwater until their prayers became bubbles, until the last air left their lungs in silence. Others were taken as slaves, the young ones, the healthy ones, chained together and marched to the ships like livestock, because monks might not be good fighters, but they could pull oars and work fields once you beat the Latin out of them. And this is the part archaeology confirms, the part that was found in excavations, the part that's not legend, but physical evidence were displayed. Bodies propped against church walls, positioned kneeling as if in prayer, a mockery so deliberate it was basically performance art. The Vikings took the golden cross from above the altar, and one of them hung it around his neck, walked outside, stood in front of the surviving monks, and spread his arms wide, mimicking Christ on the cross, while his companions roared with laughter. They weren't just stealing, they were directing a show, and the monks were both audience and props. Brother Cuthbert watched this, still alive, still on his knees, but something inside him shattered. Not his body, his soul, his belief that the world could be just, that God was watching, that suffering had meaning. The Vikings were teaching him a new theology, that men could do this to other men and feel nothing, worse than nothing, joy. That cruelty didn't need justification, just opportunity. That everything he'd been taught about divine protection was a beautiful lie told by people who'd never met real violence. The raid lasted 4 hours. 4 hours to undo 158 years of faith. By midday it was over, Vikings loading their ships with silver and gold and slaves, leaving behind 37 bodies in a silence so complete it felt like the world had ended. No bells, no prayers, just smoke and the sound of the tide pulling corpses out to sea. And then they sailed away, back into the mist, leaving Lindisfarne looking like God's rough draft, crumpled up and thrown away. But here's where it gets worse, where tragedy becomes nightmare, where history reveals its true cruelty. The Vikings came back. Not once, not twice, but again and again for 70 years, because they'd learned something valuable: monasteries don't fight back, and monks can be ransomed. Lindisfarne, Jarrow, Monkwearmouth, Iona, hit repeatedly like ATMs that dispense human suffering. Brother Cuthbert survived the first raid somehow, helped bury the 37 bodies in rocky soil, watched Abbot Higbald try to make sense of senselessness, try to rebuild faith from ash. 3 years later, they came back, and this time they didn't waste time on manuscripts or wine, went straight for the monks, the valuable ones. Cuthbert, now 43, and still useful, was chained with 11 others and marched to the ships, thrown into the belly of a longship with no light, no air, just the sound of oars and the smell of salt and vomit. 3 days crossing the North Sea, maybe 4, time lost in darkness. In Norway, he was sold to a farmer who needed hands for harvest. Cuthbert, who'd spent his entire life holding quills, now pulled weeds from frozen ground, fingers cracking and bleeding, trying to pray, but finding the words hollow. He died 3 years after capture, buried in an unmarked field, just another forgotten slave in a land that didn't know what monks were and didn't care.